Okay, I promised myself I would go back to the recap of the first movement of the Prokofiev Sixth. So that's what I'm going to do. Boy, am I stiff. So. Playing the piano feels unfamiliar to me. I'd better wake my body up. Why not? Certainly, when you're cold, the most important thing is to not over-articulate with your fingers, because they won't do it and they will protest and you can hurt yourself. So I want to make sure that the gestures I use are coarse, not to say not refined, coarse in the sense that I want to use the bigger muscles. So, and of course, the distinction between this version and the original version is that the bass is backwards and it's bass here. So instead of bass, it's goes down to the lower A this time. I thought so. So I need a little more time negotiating that distance. Whoops. And now it's back to the right order. Excellent. So, a review. Convince myself about the extra B flat in here. It's the only detailed difference, other than the reversal. I guess I justify it as being more bassy in orientation. Down the extra octave, yes. Fortissimo. So now here's where it's all different. So although I do love the way he reuses material in different guises. So the B theme, of course. Notice how all I'm doing there is making sure I'm reading the notes carefully. There was too big of a time lapse between the last time I played this recap and now for all of it to snap into focus. Some of it really has a familiarity to it. Part of that is that the passages themselves, the gestures involved, the groupings, have an innate comfort to them and logic and simplicity to them. Whereas some of the writing, as in measures, 234, for example, with lots of intervals, stuff happening in the left hand and stuff happening at the same time in the right hand, it's visually distracting. So unless it's fully integrated into my body will not respond with a recollection of how simple it is. So my mind gets active and I start saying, whoops, what are all these details? So I'm going to look at 234 as an example, which certainly looks like the most complex measure of this section. So I have, and it turns from single notes on this G7 into all these pairs, which I've done a good job of identifying. But not a good job of retaining yet. So this is easy enough. The G major, the G7, followed by a preceded by a chromaticism. Now, G again. D minor. Recognize the fact that as compared with some of those figures like the ones I was talking about in the left hand before, this is just not an intuitive thing for the body to do. So that the mind has to ride herd on the body's instincts to either simplify or go crazy. So, and then 1-5. My thumb is going leftward, so I want to make sure there's a comfort about the way I deliver the thumb. Second set of 2, using the thumb, I think, twice. I don't have to. I could use 1-4-2-5, but because then I'm using 2-4 anyway, I guess that's why I chose not to do that. Chosen for G sharp E and then F D is unusual for me. Normally I would use the more open-handed version that just connects those notes with one hand, but it certainly works. And then there's a slitheriness to the ways in which you go from 2-4 to 1-5 and then 1-4 to 5. I think an easy way of thinking about it is what fingers have to let go. Like when I use thumb twice in a row, I have to let go of the thumb, obviously, but I don't have to let go of the 5th too early. And then I can deliver my 4th over to the A sharp. So, those 2 chords at least has to feel optimal. I would normally go to 4. I think, is here my thumb is going to a lower key, here my thumb is going to a higher key, into black note. So the finger, the preliminary finger, sets up the different expectation. Having said that, I must say, it clarifies the whole passage for me. The decision that I made, I think I'm going to stick with. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, That's a nice curved gesture, settling back onto the 2 white notes here. In other words, I'm tossing into 1, 3 and then releasing energy, falling not from the thumb to the thumb. That's not possible. I have to let go. But from the 3rd out to the white notes. 3rd on black note, out to the white notes. So there's a very small letting go of the thumb before it's used again. Yes. Isn't it funny? I just draw a blank. A moment ago I played that with such ease. But the context makes it completely different. Down, please. Down. Down. 1, 3. Down. I'm curious. Okay, I told myself. I didn't feel it. I told myself what the next chord would be. And that's what I needed. It's this wonderful marriage between mind and body. Or let me say, sometimes tolerance. Sometimes the body just has its recollection of a gesture well learned. Sometimes it hasn't a clue, especially when there's emotion that's not under the hand. So then you need your mind to guide your body, which it's doing here. This, then, that. It's not good enough to go well to maintain its identity with the right hand unless the right hand is extremely supportive. And by that I mean that the right hand will sort of nonchalantly play itself without any particular distraction or concern. Right now I'm still looking like crazy. It interests me to see to what extent, if I think about it, yes, that I can play it by feel. It's still a little complicated. Okay, let's see what's up here. Sure. Almost. B flat, C sharp minor. That's a nice simple gesture. Half step here, half step here. Every one of these figures, it's arpeggiated, thirds in other words, finishing on a half step, continuing on a half step, continuing on a half step. That's good. Black note, white note, white note. Okay, so that's what I needed to know, that my right hand will try to behave. It won't kick back while I'm busy concentrating on my left. Well, a half step is a half step. settings that can be played fluently without a whole lot of extra thought and that feel natural together. For example, having to think two notes upon two notes, that's too complicated to execute this in tempo. So I've got to be able to trust that more of that happens in one fell swoop, and that it will go with that shift in the right hand. Similarly there. Or feel how unfair it is that you have to devote extraordinary amounts of time to small, tricky little passages that last just barely an instant. They go by, nobody ever knows how much you're sweating except the other people who have sweated through that same passage. But in terms of their intensity or payoff or whatever, it doesn't seem to be proportional to the amount of time you put into it. Sometimes, of course, pieces don't get played because they have passages like that, like the wonderful Schumann Fantasy, which I admit to putting off, but it's definitely on my short list of things to learn. The end of the second movement is just full of those ridiculous leaps, and a lot of people will not ever invest the time in the piece, or will and discover that they can't get the whole overwhelming sense of commitment to that piece because of the fact that those tricky little elements distract. This is not a big deal, but it is, proportionately speaking, a very big deal in terms of the time, amount of, and the mindfulness necessary to get it to work. And then ultimately it'll be a tossed off thing. At least that's what I'm counting on. And you notice I'm a little less mindful about it. It's tending to behave rather better. It's still odd. I really have to make my right hand that much more independent, easy. I will often in my teaching take the easier hand first to demonstrate that unless it has absolutely no distracting qualities to it, it's not learned well enough. In other words, if I've got to invest a great deal of energy in my left hand, I simply can't afford even for minute distractions to occur in the right hand, unless there's time in the left hand for me to do so. So I'm just as happy I'm able to chatter away and play the right hand. Okay, there's that little bit of B issue there, but overall, it's not an issue. So that time I looked at the left-hand part. Now this time I'm going to see what I rotate. It's interesting. When I think about it, I was able to get it accurately. I didn't have as much fluency as I had when I looked at the music. So there's one of your trade-offs. This is going to need revisiting, but I recognize I do have a decent solution. So let me go back. Prokofiev held notes, impossible held notes. Of course, Debussy did it with impunity. And we all clap clap our hands together and say, oh, what a lovely pedal effect. In the case of Prokofiev, he's not indicating exactly what kind of effect he wants. That's why I'm, most of the time, choosing in favor of using a sostenuto pedal to clarify the texture, because it certainly doesn't seem to work well here as a clouded sonority. Well, let me add this. I'm not convinced. Whoops. Let me go. It's one of those places I haven't written a sostenuto pedal. I think I should have. And of course, I'll need to. Preferably to do it after one of these eighth notes. It doesn't matter which one, as long as it's within range. So in other words, it's pick up and then play. Only that sonority. And it's E flat. A minor, that's how I'll think of it. Makes it nice. Oh, I kept my foot down. One measure too long. That famous B. Sudden change of texture is a little peculiar. That's what I'll probably do, is to pedal with the damper pedal in the second measure as well. A little slower. Those white notes need expectation, that's what does it. So, let me go back. Funny how the familiar or the familiar in one context becomes totally unfamiliar in the other context, which is to say, you approach it full bore from what came before, and everything you planned goes out the window. There it is. Just needs a little space. I'm going to take a big mental breath. I just needed enough room. remember my sneaky fingering here. Instead of having my left hand cross over and play its different passage on 238, I have the right hand doing it. Slithery in the left at 239. Groups of 2. 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Side turn, shifts harmonically here, here, and here. So. I would love to play fifth finger here. I know I wanted the extra focus and strength of 1, 2, 1, 3. But I've got to say, I'm having second thoughts, which will be followed by third thoughts. I'm going to put that in as parenthetically. 1, 2, 4, 5. For me. It just simplifies things a lot. I know for some people that would be a very odd or dangerous spread. 4 to 5 over that major third. But it's getting more and more likable to me. Especially if I deliver my fifth with a strong supported hand position and concentrate on my thumb. In other words, imagine playing an octave. It tilts my head, makes my fifth much more at ease with playing the D flat diagonally and spread out. Yes. And then of course I have to meanwhile, let's go back to here. Okay, the tricky part here is the A. The A, I have to have room, so I have to decide where my right hand should go. If I'm going to use this division that I like. If I play my left hand thumb over my right hand thumb, that works. Let's see, what about the reverse? Is that even possible? Oh, well, something... Sure it is. I certainly don't want to be there. My hands are already placed with hand on black notes, my right hand on white notes. So it's much easier to keep the right hand down. But then it really intrudes on the left hand space, or vice versa. Let me see what happens if I just do what Prokofiev said. That's silly. It's much harder than what I've got. Well, there is that possibility too, of letting go of my thumb in the right hand. It's kind of fun. So how do I notate that? I guess I'm going to cut and put a caesura mark. I put it in the wrong place. I'm going to put it after the F flat of 238. So, or just pick up my hand. It's so much easier. It's not a legato anyway, it's an octave. So there's no reason not to play it non-legato. Even if I pedaled it, there's no payoff in hanging on to the keys. So, yeah, just letting go altogether. Flat helps me to find my way to the G flat chord. Here, sir. There we go. Oops. Hard to see. These enharmonics again, they're distracting. I've written C sharp diminished 7. But I didn't see that in time, so if I think C sharp, C sharp, C sharp, A C sharp, not A D flat, which it says. Getting to like that fifth finger fingering better and better. Practiced the right hand recently, so it's obviously not serving me well. Well, I have a similar kind of fingering in the right hand here that I had in the left, namely 1, 2, 1, 3, which could be. Oh no, it couldn't. Well, yeah, it could be 1, 2, 4, 5. I'm going to put that in parenthetically. That's in 241, a G major first inversion chord followed by A sharp. I've got 1, 2, 1, 3. That's a lot of hand groups. Fingerings interfering with one another on the page. I've got to clarify that. Anything you write down that's helpful is helpful. Anything you write down that ends up being confusing is confusing. I know I'm stating a ridiculous truism, but the fact is, it's very easy for what you think of as handy dandy hints that you write down to either be difficult to understand or difficult to read or downright distracting in one way or another. And I've learned that I'm good at that, and I have to get rid of those situations in which I do myself a good turn that ends up being a bad turn. So, nice. Well, I've also discovered I'm playing a fingering, whoops. That's not the one I wrote. I wrote 1, 2, 3, 1, 5, 1, 4. But considering especially the fifth finger, the single hand position that replaced two hand positions a moment ago, instead of going 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 4, I'm going 1, 5, 2, 5, and then 1. And I like that. So I'm gonna parenthesize the 5, the 4 I used to have. Instead go 1, 5, 2, 5. Okay, it's again, I could spend endless amounts of time working out the logic of why this is better right now. But the payoff is always, did it work? And it came to me serendipitously. I didn't really think about trying it. It's just that in a hurry, the 2-5, without the thumb involved, in other words, suggested itself to my body as a comfort element. I'm on 1-5, the two shortest fingers on white notes. I moved in, and my longer finger took its place, the second finger, instead of another thumb. And there it is. So it's 1, 5, 2, 5. Let's see how it fits. Passages where the hands are just not doing similar things. So I may have to find I'm off out of phase by 1. I have to determine which hand provides leadership. Said another way, which hand's groups represent the groups that I think and feel. So here I have a 4-note group in the right hand. I have the end of a group in the left hand. Now I have basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes in the left hand. The big gesture in the right hand. The most significant one is the toss to the thumb. Think my right. Significant spot here, it's analogous. Here, it was the note, the key I had to play right after the 1, 2, 4, 5, which reduces the ease with which I can get to thumb. Had I used my older fingering, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 1 would have been easier to get to. Now I need to be a little more thoughtful about how I get to it. Same thing goes for the left hand. If I go 1, 2, 4, 5, and then I need a thumb note on the half step below it, thoughtfulness there that I wouldn't have needed otherwise. So here's my trade-off. So I'm going to think left hand right here when it shifts. Now I'm going to think my right hand when it shifts. And that determines my choreography of attention. playing both faster, or practicing both faster and slower in that last go-through. I'm practicing slower between thoughts or gestures, and I'm practicing faster within the gestures, because I want those gestures to have an idiomatic sense of ease to them. So when I play them with individual finger strokes, I make it more complicated. So I want to, I can get to there. But then there's the difficult shift. Whoops. Particularly where I feel the doubt that I need the time for the mental breath. A brief strategy session, in other words. I huddle together with myself and decide what I'm going to do next. Now, I missed that tricky half step. I did this time, I got the half step because that's where I needed to lead my thinking, but then I let down my guard right after, which is a standard trap. Something I had not allowed myself to do before is to look at what's happening on the keyboard. That helped a lot. Gesture that I experienced. And the result was I never got to make myself at ease with this falling fifth. It's not in any way a hard interval. But if I treated it as a brand new beginning without connection to where I was, it was difficult. Feeling the connection, I feel that my arm also tilts my hand slightly out towards the F sharp, and that gets me to the B more easily on my thumb. What I peaked at this time was the thumb note, C in the left. You bet. The B. The left hand needed the peak on the C. The right hand needed the pivot. Yes. Puzzle solving, you know. Let me go back. Letting go, that's important. Letting go. Not bad. Now let's go back a little. I don't want in any way to go from the thumb to a compressed hand position to get to the fifth. I want to release my hand. And start again. That's it. Whoops. C sharp, or the equivalent of C sharp. Okay. Third time. reviewing on its own, the left hand. Including the rather weird 2/4 I have on 245, 6, 7. Symmetry in the first measure. 3 to 4, 2 to 4. 3, 1, 3 to 4, 2, 4 to 1. Do it again. The third time, that wouldn't work at all because of the black and white arrangement. That's why I go 2, 4 to 5. So, 1, repeated sensation, something new. Fingering of the second measure is repeated, even though the sensation's a little different. White, black, black, black. White, black to 2 whites, black, black to 2 whites. So, 2, 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 1, 4. That's good. Oops. So, let's see, getting into that. Sure I can remember what I taught myself here and not be distracted by the left hand, by the right hand. In fact, here's a almost. I was actually looking just at the right hand. It's a nice way to reinforce the left hand. Getting into it. The tricky thing about this is the inconsistency of the A's. A, 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 A. So I have every alternate note, every quarter, in a 4-note, 2-note group, and a 4-note group. So 1 4-note group, then 2. Third finger works well, so I have. Meanwhile, part of the triad of the within the B theme. Up the D minor, down the fourth. one too many A's. Deceptively tricky. No, it's not deceptively tricky at all. It's obviously tricky. Four-note group, two-note group, four-note group. See, please. I don't know who I'm asking. That's the C. Let's see why. It's a half step. It's just a white note. So I'm trying to relate it to the E and just sort of grab in space where that C might be. But if I had thought about where I am, I end up on a B. C is right next door. So. In other words, I haven't practiced the transition properly. Right there. It's always funny when it's simple, a simple solution that you never saw because it was right there. Next door, that's it. It's a fingered scale. Actually, an interrupted scale. A perfect example of Prokofiev's weird notation, because he's written these as half notes. The top voices, both A's here are half notes. The top F here is a half note. Then he has the left hand playing this scale, which is certainly anatomically an impossible thing to do. So either you ignore the length of the top F, you can't even play the full first hand position without letting go, unless you do something really screwy. So, am I going to play a sostenuto pedal there? Who knows? Well, you know what? It certainly makes the most sense. Something's got to give. It's literally not possible to do as written. So And even using the sostenuto pedal, there will be a compromise as to what holds and what doesn't hold. But it's very easy to hold the whole octave with the pedal, especially because of the short left hand notes. I remember how tricky this page, this is the last page. It's not tricky executionally, it's tricky because your hands are jumping all over the place, and therefore you have to know, number one, what notes to go to, which I don't. Number two, how to guide your attention. Also something I don't know. I have engaged in figuring those things out. I've fingered them, I've thought about them, and I've promptly forgot them. So this is a page that, and the previous page, I must admit, that have enough passage work and weird coordination issues and concentration issues, attention issues, shall I say, that require a lot more input and a lot more review. The first measure is major thirds, the second measure is fourths, the third measure is tritones, whoops, then fifths, then sixths, and sevenths with tritones. That's nice. Okay, we've had this pattern before. And this is, let's see. Got to figure out what's up and what's down. Okay, so F sharp answered by A goes up to G answered by B flat. It's very hard to see that on the page.